Right into this explainer. We're unpacking one of the absolute most dramatic stories in world history. We're talking about a narrative of staggering scale, incredible ambition, and, well, inevitable collapse. We're going to break down exactly how this historical giant came to be, how it managed to grip the entire world, and why it ultimately fractured.
Here is the bottom line: a 600-year empire. I mean, really think about that time frame for a second. This wasn't just some fleeting dynasty. This was an empire that outlasted the rise and fall of countless other kingdoms, completely reshaping the globe in the process. 6 continuous centuries of rule is an absolute masterclass in statecraft and survival.
But that leads us to a massive question, doesn't it? How exactly does a relatively tiny state snowball into a 600-year global juggernaut? Because empires don't just spring up out of nowhere. To really answer this, we need to trace the sheer scale of their expansion.
So here's our roadmap. We start way back in 1299 with its birth under Ottoman I. We hit a major pivot in 1453 with the conquest of Constantinople, reach the absolute peak during the 16th century's golden age, and finally wrap things up in 1923 with the birth of modern Turkey. Let's break this down era by era.
Section 1. Birth of an empire, from a small state in Anatolia. You know, Osman's early state didn't rely purely on brute force to get ahead. They practically mastered opportunistic expansion. The early Ottomans were incredibly strategic. They were looking at a massive power vacuum. You had the Seljuk Turks on the decline, and the once mighty Byzantine Empire was just completely exhausted by internal conflicts and civil wars. The Ottomans expertly stepped right into that void.
And that gave them this brilliant 4-part formula for power. First up, a highly innovative military. They famously utilized an elite infantry known as the Janissaries. Second, skilled leadership heavily focused on effective governance. Third, and honestly, this was their geopolitical cheat code, a highly strategic location sitting literally right between Europe and Asia. And fourth, they maintained strict religious and political unity to keep things from fracturing internally.
Section 2. The ultimate turning point. The fall of a capital.
If you remember only one date from this entire explainer, make it 1453. That is the year Mehmed II achieved the impossible, the conquest of Constantinople. Using massive, newly invented siege cannons and brilliantly rolling his ships overland on greased logs to completely bypass the Byzantine chain defenses, the Ottomans shattered those supposedly impenetrable walls. They effectively ended the remnants of the Roman Empire and sent shockwaves across the entire globe.
But here's the thing. They didn't just conquer the city and loot it, they completely transformed it. Renamed Istanbul, it became their new, thriving capital, this massive center of wealth, culture, and trade that perfectly bridged the gap between East and West. And actually, fun fact, the booming coffee culture that developed right there in Istanbul eventually sparked the entire European coffeehouse craze.
Section 3. The Golden Age. Reaching the peak under Suleiman.
To really grasp the sheer scale of their power, you've got to look at their geopolitical footprint. They controlled Southeast Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, all simultaneously. By dominating the Mediterranean and monopolizing those key trade routes connecting Europe to Asian spices and silks, they became an incredibly wealthy, virtually unstoppable force.
During this golden era, their influence went way beyond the battlefield. They were building monumental architecture, like the absolutely stunning Süleymaniye Mosque, which still defines the Istanbul skyline today. Their grip on global trade generated immense wealth, while a highly organized, complex administration, along with a standardized legal code introduced by Suleiman, allowed them to smoothly govern millions of vastly diverse subjects.
Section 4. The Long Decline. A slow unraveling.
But as history shows us time and time again, things always cycle. That dynamic, battlefield-tested leadership of the 16th century slowly gave way to a deeply flawed system. By the 17th century, weak leadership, secluded palace intrigue, and crippling internal corruption began tearing the foundation of the empire apart, completely from the inside out. And that internal rot met a perfect storm of compounding external pressures. Facing brutal military defeats, devastating economic woes, and regional nationalist revolts, the empire began to fracture. As they started lagging further and further behind newly industrialized European powers, they lost massive territories, eventually earning the tragic, infamous nickname, the Sick Man of Europe.
Section 5. Collapse and Rebirth. The Final Dominoes.
The final, truly devastating blow arrived with the global chaos of World War I. The Ottomans took a massive geopolitical gamble by siding with Germany and the Central Powers. It was a bet they lost entirely. And that crushing defeat shattered whatever little remained of the old empire.
What's wild is just how fast the transition out of the ashes really was. Following the post-war collapse, the centuries-old Sultanate was officially abolished in 1922. A mere year later, in 1923, the modern Republic of Turkey was established. Just like that, the old imperial world was completely wiped away.
The main architect of that lightning-fast transition was Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. This visionary leader firmly closed the book on the Ottoman Sultanate, sweeping away the old imperial and religious systems. He took the remnants of a 600-year empire and forged a fiercely modern, secular republic virtually overnight.
Which leaves us with a totally fascinating final thought to ponder. How exactly does the legacy of a 600-year empire still shape our modern world today? Because an empire that dictated global trade, stunning architecture, and rigid borders across 3 continents doesn't just vanish into thin air. From the incredibly vibrant culture of modern Istanbul to the highly complex and heavily disputed geopolitical borders of the Middle East and Eastern Europe today, we are quite literally still living in the echoes of the Ottoman Empire. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.